Deep within the restricted archives of the world's largest institutions, such as the Smithsonian Library, lie documents whose very existence challenges our understanding of the world. Official history, as taught in schools and universities, is presented as a straight, unbroken line of events. However, artifacts occasionally surface from these archives that completely shatter this timeline. One such startling discovery is an incredibly rare book dating back to the second half of the 16th century. This collection of engravings, created between 1556 and 1574, has been preserved in remarkably good condition, as if time itself decided to save it as a witness to an alternate reality. The text accompanying the images is written in Latin, the language of science and the elite of that era, signaling the seriousness and importance of the information documented within. The authors of these works include renowned masters of the time, such as Adrien Colart, Philip Gale, and Karel van Mallory. Their involvement confirms that this is not merely the product of a wild imagination, but rather a documentary record of the surrounding world as it existed just a few centuries ago. Researchers who have managed to study this material call the book antediluvian. This term is used not only in the biblical sense, but also to describe an era preceding a global catastrophe or a radical shift in the world order. The contents of these pages describe a daily life and nature that seem fantastic to us, but were everyday reality for the people of that time. There is a bold and frightening hypothesis explaining the existence of this volume. It is not just an art album, but a practical manual, a guide for professional hunters and military personnel. According to this theory, the creation of the modern world order required a total cleansing of the planet from life forms that did not fit into the new system of control. Those whom we might call the architects of history may have decided, hundreds of years ago, to exterminate specific species. It was a grand design to reformat Earth's biosphere. To build civilization in its current form, it was necessary to eliminate competitors and dangerous predators whose existence made controlling humanity difficult. The book in the Smithsonian Library appears to be a report or an instruction manual for this massive process. It demonstrates the high price paid for the establishment of the modern world. We see chronicles of the targeted destruction of fauna that is today considered mythical or extinct for millions of years. This forces us to wonder. Perhaps many legends are not fairy tales, but memories of a real war between humanity and nature, a war that ended quite recently. Before we open these forbidden pages and analyze the methods of this great hunt in detail, be sure to subscribe to the channel and like this video. The information we are about to analyze is something you are unlikely to find in standard history textbooks. History is often written by the victors, but we rarely consider that the greatest war in human history wasn't between nations, but against nature itself and its most formidable inhabitants. There is a well-founded theory that the modern world order, as we know it today, would have been impossible without a total planetary purge. To build a global civilization with its trade routes, cities, and communications, the architects of the New World needed a safe environment. Creatures that had struck terror into human hearts for centuries, occupying the top of the food chain, did not fit into this new, ordered reality. They represented chaos that had to be tamed and eliminated. The ancient folio we are examining becomes key evidence of this planned process. These are not merely chronicles of hunting for food or sport. This is documentation of a systematic genocide aimed at eradicating species that competed with humans. If we carefully analyze the scale of the depicted events, it becomes obvious. We are looking at a report on the execution of a global task. It is quite likely that hundreds of years before the industrial era, the elites of that time made a strategic decision to clear the lands of certain forms of life. This was the preparation of the foundation for future human global dominance. The price the biosphere had to pay for our current comfort and safety. Particularly striking is the fact that on the pages of this book, Animals that modern science considers long extinct or mythical appear alongside familiar lions, tigers, and elephants. This completely breaks the accepted chronological scale. It implies that as recently as the 16th century, mere hundreds of years ago, these creatures were a biological norm. They lived side by side with humans, posing threats to settlements and hindering expansion. Hunting them didn't happen in fairy tales, but in reality, using every weapon available at the time. The people depicted in these chronicles do not look surprised when encountering monsters. For them, it is hard, dangerous, but routine work to remove a threat. Thus, we see evidence that the antique era and its fauna ended much later than official historiography suggests. Perhaps that very ancient world, with its monsters and heroes, existed right up until the late Middle Ages, until it was forcibly ended during this global cleanup operation. The extermination was carried out everywhere and methodically, leaving no chance of survival for those who did not fit the standards of the new era. However, to cope with such dangerous adversaries, humans had to display miracles of ingenuity. Standard weapons were often insufficient, and the most unexpected, sometimes shocking engineering and tactical solutions were employed. Studying these methods, we encounter technologies and techniques that look, to put it mildly, insane, forcing us to take a fresh look at the capabilities of our ancestors. Studying the hunting methods for familiar beasts presented in the book, we encounter a startling blend of high technology and primal brutality. This is not the aristocratic sport of hunting, nor is it subsistence trapping in the usual sense. What is recorded in these chronicles resembles military operations or gladiatorial combat, where man intentionally places himself in mortal danger. The described techniques cause genuine bewilderment for the modern reader, accustomed to long-range weapons, and force us to reflect on the psychology and capabilities of people of that era. Scenes of confrontation with large predators, such as bears, stand out in particular. Instead of using bows or crossbows from a safe distance, hunters don full plate armor, covering their bodies from head to toe. This implies high-quality metallurgy requiring advanced production, yet the tactic looks insane. Warriors enter into hand-to-hand combat with an enraged beast. They march toward the bear with daggers or even bare hands, relying on the strength of their armor and their own physical power. This approach suggests either incredible self-confidence or a cultural tradition where defeating a beast in equal combat was considered the highest manifestation of valor. The bear in these scenes is not just prey, but a worthy opponent to be overcome in a personal duel. A completely different strategy was applied against fast and agile predators like tigers and lions. Here, brute force gave way to sophisticated cunning and even the use of a kind of biological weapon. The chronicles detail the use of suspended beehives or special containers filled with insects. Hunters provoked the swarm to attack the beast, disorienting it and depriving it of the ability to resist, after which they finished off the weakened animal. The use of various poisons and baited traps is also mentioned. In some episodes, people throw thick sacks over the heads of predators, blinding them before the decisive strike. This speaks of a deep knowledge of animal behavior and a pragmatic, cold calculation. The end justifies the means, and the main goal is the effective elimination of the threat. This contrast of methods, from noble but dangerous duels in plate armor to the cynical use of poison and insects, paints a picture of a society that was actively mastering nature, shying away from no method. People of that time felt themselves masters of the situation, capable of subduing or destroying any rival, be it a huge bear or a pack of tigers. However, if hunting these animals can still be explained by the struggle for territory or resources, and their presence in nature raises no questions, then further study of the book leaves us bewildered. Among perfectly realistic scenes of exterminating boars and lions, images begin to appear that modern science categorically rejects. If everything is clear and logical with tigers and bears, how can we explain the presence on these same pages, in the same documentary style, of creatures that officially went extinct thousands or even millions of years ago? Upon close examination of the equipment and clothing of the characters captured in this mysterious folio, the researcher encounters an inexplicable chronological paradox. The book is officially dated to the second half of the 16th century, a time when Europe was experiencing the Renaissance, wearing ruffs, and using arquebuses. However, the people on the pages of this edition look as if they stepped off the bas-reliefs of Trajan's column. Their attire is unmistakably identified as the equipment of Roman legionaries: characteristic helmets, short tunics, segmented armor, and caligae sandals. This creates a powerful cognitive dissonance. Official history states that the Western Roman Empire fell in the 5th century, 1,000 years before these engravings were created. If we believe the textbooks, a vast chasm of dark ages lies between these epochs. Yet here we see Romans as contemporaries of the book's authors, or, at the very least, as people who lived in the very recent past. The background landscapes only reinforce this sense of time displacement. The action of many scenes unfolds among ruins that look abandoned but not ancient. We see the remains of majestic colonnades, triumphal arches, and statues that have begun to be overgrown with vegetation, but still retain their monumentality. This suggests that the catastrophe which destroyed the civilization occurred relatively recently. The ruins are not hidden under meters of soil. They stand on the surface, serving as scenery for the hunt. One gets the impression that antiquity ended not in deep history, but literally on the eve of the events described in the book, perhaps just a couple of generations before the artists worked. This confirms the hypothesis that the chronological scale of history may have been artificially stretched, and the events of the ancient world actually took place in the Middle Ages. The geography of events also raises questions. One series of images is dedicated to hunting Nile crocodiles. The captions point directly to Egypt, yet the hunting methods and the appearance of the hunters remain invariably Roman or medieval European. Huge reptiles are lured onto the shore using livestock as bait, and then beaten with stones and spears. But while the crocodiles are depicted quite realistically, the marine fauna on the adjacent pages boggles the imagination. Against the backdrop of those same antique buildings and statues standing at the water's edge, people engage in battle with sea monsters resembling hybrids of dragons and fish. These creatures possess powerful webbed paws, crests, and toothed maws, clearly not belonging to any cetaceans known to science. Such a juxtaposition of realism and fantasy, Roman aesthetics, and a 16th century date forces a reconsideration of established views on the development of civilization. Perhaps we are witnessing evidence that the Roman Empire existed much longer or transformed into the states of Europe smoothly without a 1,000-year gap, and its struggle with fauna was a continuous process. The hunters depicted here are not reenacting the past. They are living in it, using antique technologies to survive in a world full of dangers. However, sea monsters and a broken chronology are just the tip of the iceberg of this manuscript's oddities. If we carefully study the following sections, we can discover descriptions of conflicts and wars that are even harder to believe than the existence of sea dragons. One of the most shocking and difficult to explain sections of this ancient manuscript is the chapter that seemingly transports us from the field of zoology to the realm of pure fantasy or forgotten anthropology. If we perceive hunting lions and bears as a natural part of human history, the depiction of organized military actions between people of dwarf stature and giant birds baffles even the most skeptical researchers. We are talking about the famous war between pygmies and storks, a subject mentioned in ancient myths, but presented in this book with frightening documentary precision, on par with ordinary fishing or gathering firewood. These pages capture not just a chaotic skirmish, but a full-fledged military campaign. We see small people, whom the author explicitly calls pygmies. Their height is significantly less than that of an ordinary human, which is emphasized by the proportions of surrounding objects. These beings are armed with spears, shields, and banners. They form battle lines and repel aggressive flocks of large birds, resembling storks or cranes, but possessing incredible strength and fury. The pygmies use riding animals appropriate to their size, and the entire scene is permeated with the seriousness of a struggle for survival. This forces us to assume that just a few centuries ago, another species of intelligent humanoid could have existed on Earth, occupying its own ecological niche and forced to wage an endless war with giant feathered predators. The fact that this is depicted in a 16th century reference book suggests that this small folk was destroyed or displaced quite recently, becoming yet another victim of the global purge. No less amazing are the technological aspects of daily life recorded in this collection. People of that era demonstrate ingenuity bordering on genius, especially in matters of interacting with the aquatic environment. Complex methods of underwater resource extraction are described, where divers use special devices to collect roots and rare plants at the bottom of bodies of water. This is not just diving for pearls, but systematic underwater agriculture. It is evident how people submerge to depths using, likely, prototypes of diving gear or special breathing techniques to obtain food or medicinal ingredients unavailable on land. Another striking hunting method involves the use of camouflage that seems primitive but requires the highest skill. Hunters place strange constructions on their heads, hollow pumpkins or woven baskets with eye slits, imitating floating debris or waterfowl. Submerging in the water up to their necks, they remain motionless for hours, blending with the lake's surface until unsuspecting game approaches within arm's reach. Then follows a lightning-fast grab. The bird is dragged underwater without a sound. These techniques testify that man of that time was much closer to nature and understood its laws more deeply than we are accustomed to thinking. He was a predator capable of adapting to any environment. However, the most amazing creatures on the pages of this book are not pygmies or cunning divers. Next, we are about to encounter those whom modern civilization is accustomed to seeing exclusively in fairy tales and legends, but who, for the authors of this work, were a terrifying reality. Turning the pages of this archive, we approach a boundary where zoology, in the opinion of modern man, must yield to mythology. However, the manuscript's author makes no distinction between animals familiar to us and creatures that today inhabit only the pages of fantasy novels. For the compilers of this collection, a unicorn or a satyr was as much a biological fact as a deer or a wolf. This observation completely flips our perception of the past, forcing us to assume that so-called mythical creations were a full-fledged part of Earth's fauna, destroyed during that very global purge. Particular attention is drawn to the hunting of the unicorn. In mass culture, this animal is associated with rainbows and magic. But in this antediluvian manual, it is presented as a powerful and dangerous beast, an object of commerce. The hunting scene is stripped of all romanticism. It is hard work involving risk to life, where people use spears and coordinated tactics to defeat the opponent. It is worth noting that the existence of unicorns is confirmed not only by this source. Archaeologists have repeatedly found skulls and skeletons of large ungulates with a single horn, such as Elasmotherium, which officially went extinct tens of thousands of years ago. However, 16th century engravings testify that the population of these animals survived much longer and was actively exterminated by humans until it disappeared completely. Even stranger, and perhaps the most discouraging image, is the scene of human interaction with satyrs, creatures possessing the features of a human and a goat, with horns and hooves. Instead of an epic battle with demons, we see an absolutely mundane, almost comical situation. a group of women, armed with simple sticks, chases these creatures away like annoying stray dogs or pests that have gotten into a garden. In the background, men help round them up. Satyrs here do not look like rulers of the underworld. They are, rather, a wild, marginal branch of humanoids or apes that lived near human settlements and caused minor inconveniences. Such ordinariness is more frightening than any monster legends, because it turns myth into the boring, everyday life of the past. Alongside them, the book documents huge snakes whose sizes do not fit modern standards. These are not just anacondas, but giant reptiles hunted by entire detachments. Also present are birds of unknown species, whose morphology does not match any living family of birds. All this diversity is presented in the dry, protocol language of a naturalist. The artist meticulously draws the anatomy, habits, and methods of killing each species. This leads to the thought that we are not looking at allegories of vices, as art historians love to claim, but a real field report on an ecosystem that was deemed hostile and subject to total destruction. Thus, we see a world where the boundaries of the possible were much wider. The forests of Europe and Asia teemed with forms of life we have lost and forgotten. But if satyrs were merely an annoying nuisance, and unicorns a valuable prize, there existed in that world a predator that occupied the absolute top of the food chain. Everyone feared it, from kings to simple peasants, and it was the struggle against it that became the main trial for humanity. This creature was the living embodiment of fire and death, and it too was hunted, but using completely different methods. The culmination of this unique historical document is the section dedicated to a creature that occupies a special, almost sacred place in the collective consciousness of humanity. We are accustomed to considering dragons exclusively a figment of the imagination, a symbol of evil or wisdom in ancient epics. However, the manuscript's authors shatter this stereotype with cold, documentary precision. On the pages of the book, amidst descriptions of hunting boars and deer, appear instructions for destroying what is classified as Draco serratus. This name moves the legend into the category of biology, pointing to a specific species of reptile possessing heavy scales and a specific body structure. Most striking in these testimonies is the physical appearance of the monsters. There are no graceful flyers soaring in the clouds as we are used to seeing in modern fantasy. Draco serratus appear before us as heavy, squat, wingless lizards of colossal size. These are biological tanks covered in impenetrable armor, whose mass and strength made them absolute dominance in their ecosystem. Their image is devoid of magic. These are simply very dangerous, aggressive animals posing a lethal threat to any settlement. And the methods of fighting them, recorded in the Chronicle, are not heroic, but strictly military practical in nature. This is not a knight's duel with a lance, but a planned military operation to clear territory. Special attention is paid to the tactics of destroying these giants. Since direct confrontation with a creature of such size was suicide, humans used an engineering approach and cunning. The process of smoking dragons out of their lairs is described in detail. Hunters blocked cave exits and lit huge fires, directing acrid smoke inside to deprive the beast of oxygen and disorient it. This was a war of attrition, where man used fire not as a magical element, but as a chemical weapon. A cornered and weakened lizard, crawling out for a breath of air, was met by prepared squads. To kill such a well-protected target, weaponry of the appropriate caliber was required. Heavy siege engines mounted on wheeled carriages were brought into play. The Chronicles demonstrate the use of powerful ballistas, and possibly prototypes of firearms or cannons capable of piercing the reptile's thick hide. Projectiles fired from these machines were meant to inflict critical damage from a safe distance. Complex systems of nets and traps were also used to immobilize the monster before the final strike. All this proves that dragons were entirely material objects of flesh and blood. They felt pain, suffered from suffocation, and died from mechanical injuries, just like any other living being. Thus, a picture of a total war of species unfolds before us. Humanity, striving for dominance, methodically exterminated its main competitors. These dragons were not punishments from the gods or guardians of treasure. They were simply fauna incompatible with developing civilization. Their destruction became a necessity for the safety of trade routes and the expansion of cities. It was brutal, pragmatic work to eliminate a threat, which was crowned with complete success. We won this evolutionary race, wiping the rival off the face of the earth. But the complete disappearance of such a powerful species and its subsequent transformation into a myth raises a logical question. Where did all the evidence go, except for these rare books? And what does this oblivion mean for us today? Closing the final page of this unique folio, we are left alone with a frightening but inevitable conclusion. The world we live in today is built on the ruins of another, much richer and more dangerous reality. All those creatures we have examined in detail, from heavy wingless dragons to unicorns and marine leviathans, did not disappear as a result of natural selection or climate change. Their exit from the stage of history was not an accident or a whim of nature. It was the result of a planned, brutal, and methodical campaign to cleanse the planet, conducted by our ancestors to establish human hegemony. We are used to thinking that myths are born of fear of the unknown, but this document proves the opposite. Legends are simply what remains of reality after it has been physically destroyed. Dragons and basilisks were not the invention of poets. They were biological competitors occupying ecological niches that the new civilization required. As soon as the last representative of a species fell under the blows of siege engines, or was caught in cunning traps, the second stage of the cleanup began: the erasure of memory. The winners didn't just kill the enemy, they turned them into fairy tales so that future generations would stop believing in the possibility of anyone stronger than man existing. Total extermination moved from the physical plane to the informational one, and this process proved so successful that in just a few centuries we have completely forgotten our true past. The book from the Smithsonian Library acts as a black box of a lost era, a miraculously surviving witness to a global redistribution of the world. It screams silently that the official chronology is bursting at the seams. If hunters in Roman armor were destroying dinosaur-like creatures just 500 years ago, it means the timeline we memorize in schools has been artificially stretched or distorted. Antiquity, the Middle Ages, and the Renaissance are woven here into a single ball of events that was severed by some catastrophic event or the willful decision of those designing the new world order. We are the heirs of this great harvest, living in a sterile, safe world where machines have taken the place of monsters and the magic of nature has given way to technology. This story teaches us how fragile and unreliable human memory is. What seems like an unshakable fact today may become a forgotten legend tomorrow, and what we consider fiction may turn out to be lost truth. We walk on Earth soaked in the blood of creatures we were taught to believe never existed. And the only way to get closer to understanding who we really are is to look critically at any dogmas and search for rare, inconvenient artifacts like this one that the system forgot to destroy. Perhaps somewhere in closed archives lie other books, ready to tell us even more incredible stories. But that is a topic for future investigations. If this breakdown has made you look at history in a new way, be sure to subscribe to the channel and hit the bell icon. Write in the comments, do you believe dragons lived in the Middle Ages? See you in the next videos!